Daily. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Good evening, Eamon.
Hey, good evening, Casey. I think there's a Grammy in the works there for that
Certainly
Trump.
for the crack team that put that montage together.
Yeah, I was going to say, very impressive. Good stuff, guys. Thanks very much for that, Casey. I'm Eamon Mohideen in for Ari Melber this evening. We begin with Donald Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, speaking out in his first major interview since the FBI raid on his home and office back in April. And as the feds get access to over 1 million documents that were seized in that raid, Cohen today appearing to break with Donald Trump.
Remember, he famously said he would take a bullet for President Trump. That's what appears to be changing right now. He's very much now his own man.
All right, Cohen didn't appear on camera and wouldn't say directly if he'd flip on President Trump, but he did say, my wife, my daughter, and my son have my first loyalty and always will. I put family and country first. Country first, seemingly a warning to President Trump. And on issue after issue, Cohen drew a line between his views and the president, saying he didn't agree with demonizing or vilifying the FBI. He doesn't like the term witch hunt, and even criticizing the Trump campaign for that famous Trump Tower meeting, calling it a mistake and simply an example of poor judgment. Cohen today also traded barbs with Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti. But in that new interview, when Cohen was asked if Trump would, if Trump told him to make that payment to Stormy Daniels, Cohen would only say this: I want to answer, one day I will answer, but for now, I can't comment further on advice of my counsel. With me now, former federal prosecutor John Flannery, Natasha Bertrand, a staff writer for The Atlantic, and NBC's intelligence and national security reporter Ken Delaney. Great to have all of you with us. John, let me begin with you. Help us decipher this interview by Michael Cohen, the substance of it, what was said, and the manner in which it was done.
Sure. My view is that it's less than meets the eye, and people seem to be so excited that he would say anything at all that they're reading all sorts of things into it. And what I got out of it was he still thinks he's innocent, and this is a man who's talking about his family, and we know what a worthless person he's been. I mean, he pays off women during the campaign. He makes a loan based on false pretenses. He funnels the money through his firm. He does pay for play when Trump wins with AT&T and others. And he has a meeting with a Ukrainian to have a plan to save Russia from the sanctions, and hands it to Flynn, who is cooperating with the government. And now we're supposed to believe he cares at all about family. And when he says country, which he's never shown any interest in before, it strikes me that what he's doing is sending a signal to Trump. He doesn't have to go on TV to say he's going to cooperate. The lawyer he's talking about, Perillo, is the chief of the criminal division and can pick up a phone. I don't think he's come to grips with either admitting his own guilt or pointing at anyone else. And everybody's reading this into this because they want to believe it. But I don't think it's there.
So what would you say is the main reason then behind this? Do you think this is merely a publicity stunt that he's trying to kind of defend perhaps his reputation, as he said in that interview? Or is he in fact trying to send a signal to the White House that, hey, I am now somewhat available to cooperate with the government if I so choose?
Well, do you believe he's the mob-style guy that we've heard about for ages, shouting and everything else? Or is this puppy dog fella that now loves his family and loves his country and is going to do all of this? I think it's a grooming thing. But I thought he was only talking to one person. And that guy occupies the West Wing and apparently has nothing else to do but watch the people who would testify against him.
Ken, let me get your thoughts on something. What do you make of Cohen's timing in this interview? When you piece together the timeline of events, you had, the feds getting access to a lot of new documents, and, perhaps in addition to all of the developments that are happening behind the scenes with the Mueller probe.
Well, I mean, I spoke to a friend of Michael Cohen's in the last hour, and he said that, look, Cohen has been under incredible pressure for some time now, and it's starting to get to his family. I mean, this whole ordeal is costing him a lot of money, and now he's starting to worry that he's actually at risk of going to prison. So, look, there are, as John said, two schools of thought about why he did this, one of which is that he is appealing essentially for a pardon to Donald Trump, saying, look, pardon me now, or or I'm going to flip and tell dark secrets about you. But, you know, there's an argument against that. He's hired this attorney with close ties to the Southern District who can negotiate a deal. You know, he clearly feels abandoned by Donald Trump and seems ready to make a deal. I mean, he made some comments in this interview, you know, that are not consistent with the way Trump sees the world and or critical of Trump. And look, I mean, the bottom line is the feds have 1.3 million documents now in their possession that they got from Michael Cohen, some of which clearly pertain to conduct by Donald Trump.
And Natasha, let me get your analysis on the timing and the substance of this. Are we reading too much into it, or is there something there in the decision that Michael Cohen has given this interview and in the image that he's trying to put out, saying that his family and country come first, not his loyalty to the president, which was what he was always known for when he was kind of when his name was starting to be bounced around in the Mueller investigation?
Well, I think that one of the most interesting things about the fact that George Stephanopoulos got this first sit-down interview with Cohen since his offices and home was raided by the FBI is that George Stephanopoulos, of course, was the one who first reported last month that Cohen was thinking about flipping, that he was likely to cooperate with federal prosecutors. So we saw that, and then a couple weeks later we see the sit-down interview. It's just very curious that George Stephanopoulos would be the one to get this. I think that one thing that has been kind of overlooked, and probably the biggest revelation in this article, is that as soon as Cohen's new lawyer comes on full time, ABC reported that his joint defense agreement with the president is going to end. And of course, that is exactly what happened with Michael Flynn before he decided to cooperate with investigators. So that could be a big sign that Cohen is thinking of perhaps cooperating here if the ABC reporting is correct, just in terms of the fact that it will be a very adversarial kind of legal relationship between Cohen and the president if they do end that joint defense agreement. But I also think, you know, everything that Ken said is fair. You know, there's a lot of pressure being put on Cohen right now, and he likely was sending some kind of a signal to the president as kind of a last-ditch effort to tell him, look, I'm not on your side 100%. I don't think that this is a witch hunt, or at least that's the image that he's trying to portray to the public and tell the FBI. So he clearly doesn't align with the president on everything, and he has felt like he has been left out in the cold by the president and his allies.
All right, well, so someone who definitely disagrees with the fact that Michael Cohen is not speaking to the president is Michael Avenatti. Take a listen to Michael Avenatti talk about Michael Cohen in this interview, and what he is saying is a direct appeal for President Trump to listen to him. Watch.
This is Michael Cohen trying to send a message to the president that he wants the president to pay his legal bills or he's going to flip. You know, he's playing games with the American people. If he has information that's damaging to this president, and I know for a fact that he does, then he should come forward and state it and disclose it now.
So, John, do you think that Cohen in that instance, according to Michael Avenatti in this interview, was speaking to the president, or was he trying to send a signal as well to the prosecutors that he is willing to play ball here?
I don't think this would work with the Southern District where I served, and I don't think his lawyer would need to do that. And I think Avenatti does talk.
Why not? Let me ask you real quick.
Well, because we don't want people posturing for us and trying to press us to say, you know, I'm a good person and you should allow me to cooperate when there's no evidence he has anything to say. Wanting to cooperate means actually falling on your own sword and saying you did something. And, you know, Comey's pointed out something very interesting about this president, and that is the kind of mob feeling. No, they don't go out and break legs, but they kind of run this loyalty thing that way. And I wonder if he wasn't saying when he said country, I'm going to be faithful to you, the country, something that I've never cared about my whole life, and it was a symbol to Trump. And instead of saying help me or I'm going to cooperate, he may have been saying I'm going to do what every other mobster does. I'm going to go through this whole thing, and if I do at the end of it, I hope you'll take care of my family, and if you can, pardon me, do so. And that's my suspicion about this. I can't believe this guy's character has changed, and everybody's so jubilant that it appears to be the case. I think that makes no sense to me.
Well, well, I was going to say really quickly, as you can imagine, a lot of people want to know if the president watched this. That was certainly something that came up today. Watch the reaction from the White House.
Well, you know,
hold on one second, John. I want to play the reaction from the White House. Go ahead.
Okay.
The president watched the interview this morning and potentially how he feels about the idea that his former attorney said that he would put his wife, his son, his family, and his country first, but not the president.
Once again, I'm not going to weigh into this issue and refer to the president's outside counsel.
A non-answer answer there. John, I'm going to let you have a quick take at it. What did you make of that response?
He never said not the president. He never said that. That's what everybody has concluded he meant. He did not say not the president. And I think this could be their own communication. And they used Twitter to broadcast the fact that when this a statement was going to be made. And I don't know what he hopes to get out of it, but I don't think he hopes to get anything out of the prosecution from it. And maybe he hopes we'll feel more tender toward him. But I think it was a message to only one person, to Trump, and it could be Avenatti's view, my view, or any of the other views we expressed. But I think you have to assume this guy's bad character going forward, Ken, and not assume anything good about it. Sorry.
So Ken, let me get your take on one thing that came out of this interview, which was pretty interesting. I know you've reported on extensively. Why would Michael Cohen even address something like the Trump Tower meeting? He kind of spoke about it vaguely in this interview, saying that it was a mistake, lack of poor judgment, I should say. But why would he even go into those waters?
I think to set himself apart from the values of what was portrayed at that meeting. The same way Steve Bannon did. Steve Bannon, recall, called that meeting borderline treasonous. And I think Cohen, look, part of this was a PR push. You know, I agree with John that he didn't need to do this to talk to the prosecutors. He's got a lawyer that can do that. But we shouldn't underestimate Michael Cohen's desire to go on to sort of, you know, be in the middle of the spectacle and to get his message out. And this was part of the message that he wanted to convey, that he's a reasonable person, that all this stuff that you've been seeing, this meeting where the Russians offered dirt on Hillary Clinton, he's not on board with that. It's an open question, I think, whether he's aiming to cooperate or whether this was a message, you know, a request for the president to pardon him. But I think in the midst of that, he wanted to send certain messages to the public, and that was one of them.
Yeah, and certainly there's no doubt that as well, when you think of some of the audio recordings that have come out of him threatening a journalist, for example, his image over the course of the last several weeks has been tarnished in addition to what we'd heard over the past several months. Natasha, Michael Cohen also said this, which I thought was pretty interesting. He said, "I will not be a punching bag as part of anyone's defense strategy. I am not a villain of this story, and I will not allow others to try to depict me that way." What do you make of that sentence and his ability or his desire to try to shape the discourse around his image and perhaps send a message to those that may want to use him as the culprit in any wrongdoings?
It seems like publicly, at least, he's doing everything that he can to try to distance himself from the president. Whether or not that's meant to send a message to the president himself, like, hey, I am willing to turn on you, I'm willing to flip on you if you don't pardon me, or whether it's just because he's doing a PR operation and trying to revamp his image like he told George Stephanopoulos that he was, that remains to be seen. But of course, I think it's important that we also remember when he resigned as the finance chair of the RNC, he cited the president's immigration policies. When he did so, he said that he didn't agree with them. And of course, now he's also refusing to say that he was the one who went ahead and paid Stormy Daniels, the porn star, on behalf of Trump, just on his own volition. Whereas in the past, he was, you know, very, very much vocal about that. He said, I was the one who did it. Whereas now he says, on the advice of my counsel, I don't want to talk about it. So that's a shift. And then, of course, the Trump Tower meeting criticism is also a shift. So this has been a steady pattern for Michael Cohen over the last month and a half or so to distance himself from Trump.
Ken, I know that Cohen's lawyers are actually trying to get Michael Avenatti from speaking in public. In a new brief, they actually write, like a small-town carnival, a magician who attempts to confuse the audience with smoke and mirrors. Avenatti attempts to somehow justify his conduct by pulling the First Amendment out of his tiny bag of tricks while at the same time pointing his finger at others. Can they actually silence Avenatti here?
It's not clear, Eamon. I mean, they could get the judge to impose a gag order in the case, but Avenatti's not really talking about the facts of the case. He's merely sort of insulting Cohen and saying things that Cohen doesn't like in a very inflammatory and telegenic way. And we have a First Amendment in this country, and I'm not sure they can prevent him from doing that.
Yeah, it seems like he's gotten under the skin of Michael Cohen in the past, and certainly at times the president as well. John Flannery, Natasha Bertrand, Ken Delaney, great to have all three of your perspectives with us. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Coming up, Trump's revealing new statement on whether he'll confront Vladimir Putin about the 2016 election hack. Also, the Supreme Court fight, why the White House seems so afraid to talk about what might happen to Roe versus Wade. And the Trump administration now trying to hide the facts about how many migrant kids are separated from their parents. All that, plus much more on the news that Michael Cohen may already be parting ways with President Trump. I'm Ayman Mohyeldin in for Ari Melber, and you're watching The Beat on MSNBC.
I'm Casey Hunt in for Chuck. Hi, Casey.
Hey, Nicole. It's great to see you, and it's great to see all of you. If it's Monday, should the president panic?
Tonight, is the president's fixer preparing to flip? Or does Michael Cohen have another motive for breaking his silence?
He said he wanted to respect the process.
Plus, Supreme interviews. The president closes in on his pick for the Supreme Court.
We'll be announcing it on Monday. I think the person that is chosen will be outstanding.
And the best words, the sounds of making America great again.
Nobody does it better.
This is MTP Daily, and it starts right now.
Good evening. I'm Casey Hunt in Washington, in for Chuck Todd. Welcome to MTP Daily. We begin tonight with the clearest indications yet that President Trump's longtime attorney and personal fixer, Michael Cohen, could flip and cooperate with federal prosecutors. In an interview with ABC News, Cohen praised the FBI and said his first loyalty was to his family and country, not the president. He also had some choice words for Mr. Trump about the Russia investigation. The big question right now is, how will the president react? Would the president consider intervening, perhaps with a pardon, perhaps in some other form? Or does he think Cohen is bluffing? What do you think? What do you think federal prosecutors think? What do you think the White House thinks? Well, moments ago, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was asked about Cohen's comments, but she refused to answer.
Is the president worried after his comments this morning that Michael Cohen is going to flip, and is he considered at all paying Michael Cohen's legal fees?
As you know, I'm not going to answer questions on this topic and would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
Can you at least tell us whether the president watched the interview this morning and potentially how he feels about the idea that his former attorney said that he would put his wife, his son, his family, and his country first, but not the president?
Once again, I'm not going to weigh into this issue and I would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
There's a lot we don't know, so let's start with what we do. There is arguably no clearer example of Trump-style loyalty than Michael Cohen. He's bragged about his willingness to take a bullet for Mr. Trump. He's said he'd do anything to protect Trump and his family. He's threatened reporters with expletive-filled rants and attempts to bury negative stories. He even paid off a porn star on the eve of the election with his own money. But that was before the FBI seized his BlackBerries and federal prosecutors decoded his encrypted messages and pieced together the contents of his shredder. Now, the president's most loyal foot soldier apparently has bigger loyalties. Here's what he told ABC News, quote, "My wife, my daughter, and my son have my first loyalty and always will. I put family and country first. To be crystal clear, my wife, my daughter, and my country have my first loyalty." He went on to say this about the president, quote, "I will not be a punching bag as part of anyone's defense strategy. I am not a villain in any story and won't allow others to try and depict me in that way." Cohen's break with the president went even further. Quote, "I don't agree with those who demonize or vilify the FBI. I respect the FBI as an institution as well as their agents. I don't like the term witch hunt. As an American, I repudiate any foreign government's attempts to interfere in our democratic process. And I would call on all Americans to do the same." Look, there's every reason to question Cohen's motivations for speaking out. The Wall Street Journal reported just a few weeks ago that Cohen wants the president to pay his legal bills. But regardless of Cohen's motives, there's Cohen's message to Trump. And ultimately, we don't know what he knows. But the president does. Joining me now is Daniel Goldman, former assistant U.S. attorney in that pivotal Southern District of New York. And starting today, an MSNBC legal contributor. Welcome, sir, to our network.
Thank you.
And tonight's panel, Sahil Kapoor, national political reporter at Bloomberg News, Hugh Hewitt, NBC News legal analyst and nationally syndicated radio host, and Anita Dunn, former White House communications director under President Obama. Mr. Goldman, I want to start with you on kind of the legal conjectures here. I mean, there are are many theories as to why Mr. Cohen is doing what he is doing now. What, in your view, is the most plausible explanation?
I really think it's just simply a PR blitz. I think Michael Cohen has been run through the ringer for the last several months, and I think that he's had to be quiet. He's not someone who generally likes to be quiet, as some of those recordings that came out in recent weeks indicate. He's a brash, somewhat crass, and can be threatening person. He's a big personality, and he's really been trashed over the last couple of weeks. He's talked for months about his concern about his family. That is always something that witness watchers, defendant watchers should pay close attention to, because that is often the clue to whether someone is going to cooperate. But the biggest thing to me that stuck out from this interview was the fact that when he hires his new attorney, Guy Petrillo, who was the chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York later this week, that there will no longer be what's called a joint defense agreement with the president. And that is an agreement whereby lawyers and clients can share documents, can share information, can share strategy. And that is usually an indication that you're breaking with someone. You're not going to have a shared strategy going forward, so you're going on your own, which usually means that you're going to cooperate.
Fair enough. I do want to point out NBC News' reporting is a little bit different on this topic than where ABC is. We're still working on reporting some of that out. But Sahil Kapoor, let's talk about the politics of this a little bit. I mean, what, in your view, why would Michael Cohen do this? I thought it was so interesting that he seems to be explicitly talking about the valor of the country's FBI agents, in some ways kind of dragging himself out from the tabloid world. I mean, this interview was not with the New York Post. It was with ABC News.
Right. Well, two things I wonder is what his message is and who his intended audience is. Is he trying to send a message to President Trump and saying, don't try to railroad me, don't try to throw me under the bus, I have a lot of information and I'm going to say something? Is he trying to speak to prosecutors? Is he trying to suggest, you know, dangle this before them and try to see what they have, if this is going to get him out of trouble, if they're enticed by the prospect?
Couldn't he just call them up, though, if that was the case? I mean, couldn't he just get them on the phone?
Could he? Would his lawyers have to do that? I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah.
Either way, it seems like his tone has certainly changed from the man who's going to take a bullet for Trump to now, where he's singing a very, very different tune.
Yeah, Hugh Hewitt, if you're President Trump, what do you take away from what Michael Cohen did this morning?
I think you pick up the phone, call Rudy Giuliani and ask him how much trouble I am in, and I think Rudy's answer is a lot if there is anything that has been done here that is wrong, because as you just pointed out, he can pick up the phone and call the Southern District at any moment. His lawyer would have a heart attack if that's the case. But if he knows anything, it's up for grabs. The late Chuck Colson once told me conspiracies are impossible to hold together because everyone has an incentive to turn. Mr. Cohen has an incentive to turn.
Yeah. Anita Dunn, I mean, as somebody who's, watching Sarah Sanders kind of essentially say, I'm not going to have any part of this. I mean, you have been in this role defending presidents in the past. What if it were your White House, what would you do in this situation?
Well, the temptation to kick it to the lawyers would be almost overwhelming at any time like this, Casey. You know, one of the interesting things about the interview this morning, and again, it's not clear if it was the opening of a plea bargain or a pardon negotiation, who that audience was, right? But it's very interesting he didn't do it on camera. This was an interview with ABC News that was conducted off camera and reported out. And that speaks to the heavy involvement of new lawyers and a very different strategy from what he's followed earlier, and I think a smart strategy. I think Michael Cohen's always going to be better in print than he is on television.
So, I know President Trump's reaction here is going to be fascinating to watch. Is he going to try to move Cohen off of this confrontational approach with sugar and honey, or is he going to start attacking him, trying to diminish his credibility for fear that Cohen could say something that could, that could damage President Trump and try to preempt that? So I really don't know, and it's going to. I think how the president reacts is going to suggest. I think what's in his mind, what's in his conscience with this whole thing.
Yeah, it's been strangely quiet this afternoon from his Twitter account.
It has. I've been sort of in the hours leading up to the broadcast thinking, okay, surely we'll get something here, right, but nothing yet. Daniel Goldman, how do prosecutors read something like this? I mean, can you just pick up the phone and call the SDNY office, or is there something here that would help Michael Cohen with prosecutors who might be thinking about how to treat him?
Look, if we're going to take what he said to ABC at face value, what's going to happen is, first of all, Michael Cohen would never call the prosecutors directly. The prosecutors are not allowed to speak to any represented individual. They must speak to the lawyers. So what is likely to happen happen is that his new lawyer is going to come in, and he's going to have conversations with the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, and they're going to try to figure out, the prosecutors are going to either give whatever information they want to give. At some point, they will likely say, we are getting ready to charge Michael Cohen with X, Y, and Z crimes. Does he want to come in and meet with us and tell us everything that he has done and everything that anyone else he knows has done? And at that point, Michael Cohen's lawyer, Guy Petrillo, and Cohen will sit down and they'll evaluate their options. So I think we may not even hear anything about this again before Michael Cohen is already meeting with prosecutors, because he likely will not be actually indicted if he is going to cooperate. That would be a discussion about potential charges, and then he'll make a decision what he wants to do, whether he wants to cooperate or whether he wants to fight it. But all of his words, all the praise for the FBI, all of the disengagement from the language that Trump has been using is all an indication to me as a former prosecutor that he's playing nice. He's trying not to say anything that will upset law enforcement and the prosecutors, and he's leaving his options open, and I think most likely he will cooperate.
And very quickly, why not go on camera? How does that help him?
Well, I'm actually quite surprised that his lawyer let him even have this interview. There's no advantage for Michael Cohen to be recorded, either certainly on camera, where the recording, his words, his intonation, his body language can be seen. But if you're going to be interviewed, it's much better for Michael Cohen's perspective to at least do it off camera, where the prosecutors would have to call George Stephanopoulos to ask him what Michael Cohen said to him, rather than just play a video.
Yeah, let's play this out a little bit here, too. Hugh Hewitt, what would be the ramifications if the president were to pardon Michael Cohen?
Well, the president will be impeached by a Democratic majority, period.
Regardless of what happens?
He will be impeached by the Democratic majority if they take the House. If he does things that are reported in a Mueller report, which indicate collusion of any sort or manipulation of the pardon process, I think he loses votes in the Senate, which, well, he'll be acquitted. And therefore, there is no upside to a pardon, period. It's bad for the reputation of the president. It's bad for the country. It's bad all the way around. So it should be a non-starter.
Yeah. Anita, do you agree with that assessment?
I think a pardon would be politically disastrous. If you look at what ended Richard Nixon's reign as president, it wasn't anything except the crumbling of his political support from within his own party, and that's why he had to leave office. And I think a pardon starts to take you to that place. I agree with Hugh.
So, what's your reporting say on that point? I mean, do we think that the Republican Party? I mean, I suppose it could depend largely on what happens here coming up in November, but I don't see the evidence yet that the Republicans here are ready to make that kind of a break, regardless of what Trump were to do.
Right. Well, I think for now, Republicans certainly want to run on the prospect of impeachment because it energizes their base, and Democratic leaders are worried about overstepping rhetorically on the impeachment issue. I do agree that something like a pardon for the president's allies is the kind of thing that would ignite a potential Democratic House to pursue something like impeachment. I do think the Democratic Speaker, whoever that is going to be fending off that question almost on a daily basis. But for now, Democrats are resisting. They are trying to, take the responsible route and saying, let's not jump to that conclusion, let's wait. And also Democrats recognize that if they start pursuing the issue of impeachment without Republican support, even if they think they're 100% right on the merits, it looks bad. It'll look like they're trying to overturn the results of an election, and that's what they fear.
Right. So then it becomes a question of how they position themselves in public, Cohen and Trump against each other. The president has been very clear repeatedly that he no longer views Michael Cohen as his lawyer, but instead as a businessman. Take a look.
Michael is in business. He's really a businessman, a fairly big business as I understand it. I don't know his business, but this doesn't have to do with me. Michael is a businessman. He's got a business. He also practices law. I would say probably the big thing is his business, and they're looking at something having to do with his business. I have nothing to do with his business. I can tell you he's got other things. He's got businesses, and from what I understand, they're looking at his businesses, and I hope he's in great shape. Yeah. But he's got businesses.
Is that plausible, Hugh?
It is plausible that Michael Cohen is in trouble for things unrelated to the campaign of 2016. Very plausible. That's, in fact, what happened to Paul Manafort. And the president is trying to draw a bright line there, but that doesn't mean that Michael Cohen doesn't have information that could be detrimental to President Trump on matters unrelated to the Russia collusion investigation. So, in other words, we could end up somewhere completely unrelated to Russia that does involve Donald Trump and financing for his projects from years ago.
Right. But there's been very few signs, really, that Trump's voters are willing to believe anybody who isn't President Trump, regardless of the truth.
So that is absolutely correct when it comes to this investigation for now. And again, this is a process. And at this point right now, they haven't seen anything. They haven't heard anything except a lot of noise from Washington, D.C. They don't follow this. People in this country are not following this the way we follow this, right, at all. But again, where you start at the beginning isn't necessarily where you end with any of these stories. And I think that obviously Mueller has been very careful to not hurt his credibility. And when the Mueller report comes out, however he delivers his information, that will be an important step in this process.
Right. And of course, the overarching question, whether voters are going to be willing to believe those conclusions after what the president has said about it. Daniel Goldman, thank you very much. Sahil, Hugh, and Anita all will be sticking around for more. We have more on the president and